I'll say this. Show goes on. Both Michigan and Michigan State have punched their tickets into the second weekend of the NCAA tournament, setting up a potential Elite Eight matchup between these two teams. We are going to talk all about that. Great weekend in sports. Great week of Michigan sports. We got a lot to cover on this show, whether it's college basketball, Tiger baseball, going to sprinkle in a little bit of Pistons talk. This is a very exciting time of year. But before we get into that, welcome into the show. I am Chris Castellani. You can find me on Twitter at Castellani2014. If you want to find all of our content, you can see it at CastellaniContent.com. That is getting updated all the time, post-game videos. If you want to get caught up on every single video that we've done for Michigan basketball this year as they continue to make their quest through the NCAA tournament, you can go and find it on CastellaniContent.com. Of course, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let's continue to get those watch hours up. We're popping off on TikTok as well. Link to that is on my Twitter. And of course, you can listen to this podcast in audio form on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So I very much greatly appreciate that. Now, let's move on to what should be a pretty darn good show today. We're going to start by talking about the wonderful, whimsical, wild Wolverines of Michigan. Bunch of wild and crazy guys. They punched their ticket to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament in a run that is becoming, I mean, you go back obviously to the Big Ten tournament now, a pretty remarkable story, what this team's been able to do and how they've been able to turn things around. And they've reverted back to the team that we saw at many points throughout the Big Ten season. They picked the right time to do it. And we are going to recap all of that. Obviously, a really incredible weekend, but we're going to start with how this began on Thursday against UC San Diego. And I have to give myself a little bit of credit. But even more so, I want to give Tony Garcia, who was our Chris and Company guest last week, a lot of credit. I think that we did a very fair, honest job of breaking down what this game could be against UC San Diego. And we had a feeling it was going to be a close game. I mean, look, I know 5-12 upsets are like, I don't want to call them common, but everybody that fills out a bracket has a 5-12 upset. And I knew UC San Diego was going to be a very popular upset pick, but Michigan was a 2.5-point favorite. I mean, you could barely even call that an upset. It's an upset in terms of seeding, but 2.5. I mean, that's basically a coin flip game. And that's what this was. Now, I think I speak for all, not just Michigan and Michigan State fans, but I think college basketball fans here when I say that you go into a tournament and you go into a tournament game looking ahead and thinking about what worst case scenario could be, because there is no tomorrow. There's no, okay, we had an off day today, but we can play the rest of the Big Ten schedule. No, like if you have a bad half, hell, if you have a bad first 5 minutes, it could derail your entire postseason. And I think for the most part, there is kind of a formula to these upsets. And one of the big ones is that a team like UC San Diego that shoots a lot of threes, that makes a lot of threes, if they get hot early from beyond the arc, and if they jump out to an early lead, very often that's kind of the formula for an upset. I think back to, and I'm sorry to bring this up, Spartan fans bringing up the bad memories, but I think back to the Middle Tennessee upset in 2016 and how that game, I think it was like, it started like 12-2, 15-2 or something in favor of Middle Tennessee State. It's like they carried that momentum with them the rest of the game. Credit to Michigan for coming into this game very strong. And that's been something that, especially in the latter part of the Big Ten season, we've had to worry about is I felt like they've come into games just looking kind of defeated. They jump out to a 10-0 lead. Now, what had me worried, and I was justified in my worry here, is that, I'll be real, UC San Diego was terrible in the first half of this game. I mean, they could not make a thing. You give credit to Michigan's defense, but I think whether consciously or subconsciously, I can tell the difference between good defense and a team just not hitting. And this was about 50-50. Now, UC San Diego couldn't really create anything from the inside. I think that was kind of to be expected with the height advantage that Michigan had, all over the floor. But they were getting good looks from three and just missing them. And I felt like Michigan had an opportunity in the first half of that game to really bury them, and they didn't. And it was a movie that we've seen play out a million times where they have a double-digit lead, they start turning the ball over. It did seem like at the end of the first half, they found the formula because Vlad got hot, Danny started to get going, and as I talked about with Tony Garcia on Chris and Company, like there was going to be size advantages everywhere. I figured that they were going to try to play through their 7-footers. And despite all the positive things that I have to say about this weekend, and they are plenty because Michigan continues to fight and survive and advance, the offense in the second half of that game was very baffling to me. And I would imagine someone smarter than me can point out exactly what it was, but I was baffled by the fact that Michigan was having their 7-footers away from the block. Vlad Golden, and maybe you give UC San Diego credit for pushing him out to the perimeter. Possibly. I don't know exactly what it was, but Michigan's offense was not in sync. And it's bizarre because they turned the ball over a ton in the first half. They did not in the second half. And it's just one of those things where I think it's just the identity of this club where, yes, they turn the ball over a ton, but sometimes that's when they're at their most efficient. It's kind of paradoxical in that sense, but I felt like the offense was looking a lot better in the first half. And then, Michigan led most of the way, almost the entire way. They find themselves down by a point with about 2 minutes left. And in a shot that we hopefully look back on as one that sparked, a pretty remarkable run, Trey Donaldson again. I mean, Mr. Big Shot, long distance 3-pointer to put Michigan up for good. Free throws were an issue. They shot around 50% from the line. Turnovers were an issue. All that existed. And I said in my post-game video after, and I stand by this, during the regular season, I would spend more time talking about that and complaining about that because there were many games in the Big Ten season that they won that were very close, where the problems were apparent, where the turnovers were there, where the missed free throws were there. And I came on and said, look, this is a good win for now. But as we get deeper into the Big Ten season, these issues will start to rear their ugly heads, and this could become a legitimate problem. And they did. We saw how much this team struggled in the latter part of the campaign. But when you're talking about a one-and-done format, then you could turn the ball over 100 times. I need you winning by a point. Now, preferably, you'd want to create a little bit more cushion for yourself, a little bit more margin for error. But I think most people acknowledge coming in that UC San Diego was an underseeded 12, that this was probably going to be a close game. And to Michigan's credit, and I'll say the same thing about the Texas A&M game, and really you could say the same thing about how they've performed all year, they do not get rattled in these situations. In these close games, as Tony talked about it last week when I interviewed him, there is a confidence that you have in this team that they're going to be able to find a way to figure it out. Now, when they were down 1 with 2 minutes left, I wasn't feeling great. And when they were clanking free throws, I wasn't feeling great. But then, you'll have that final possession where you're up 3 and you just play a great defensive possession. Danny Wolf has a hand in a guy's face. He forces a 3, and that's that. And Michigan moves on. And I was getting a lot of questions after that game because, of course, you almost lose to a 12. And so immediately people are saying, oh, man, this means they lose to Texas A&M, right? I mean, they barely won this game. I've been watching this tournament for a long time. To me, there's no correlation between how a team performs in one game versus the other. And look, but what I talked about and what I said about the Texas A&M game before Michigan played is the same thing I've said about pretty much every team on their schedule, which is Michigan can play with and I think beat anybody. Now, I don't know if they've run into an unstoppable force at any point this year. I guess Michigan State would be the closest thing. Right. But I still feel like at their best and at their most efficient, this is a really dangerous squad against anybody. So coming into the Texas A&M game, I kind of expected it to play out in a similar fashion to how so many games that they've played this season have played out, which is they'll get a lead, they'll look good, then they'll look bad, they'll start turning the ball over, and then those final 3-4 minutes will determine whether or not Michigan's moving on or whether or not their season's over. And this is where, despite the fact that it was another close game, I got to say they kind of flipped the script. Because Michigan, I thought, came into the game fairly strong. They did not close the first half well, and they left a lot of points on the board. They missed a lot of layups, man. It was weird. I mean, efficient players. Vlad was missing them, and Cheddar missed a bunny. I mean, they were behind at the end of the first half, and I kept thinking to myself, that barrage of turnovers, which we have seen even in Michigan's wins this year, was coming. And in the second half, they were more efficient with the basketball. And the thing that we've talked about, and John Beilein brought it up all the time about outliers. You need outliers to be successful in this tournament. You need guys to pop off that you don't necessarily expect, right? To have those moments. The thing that we've rightfully complained about with this group, especially in the latter part of the campaign, was the inefficient play in the wings. I think, Donaldson played a few really bad games at the point, but Donaldson was always your point guard. You needed more efficiency, you needed more energy, and really you just needed more scoring from your wings. And this is where you have to give Dusty credit, because I think the inception of that game and how that all happened began much earlier in the season, because it was January, maybe early February, when we pointed out the fact that Dusty he was playing LJ Kaysen a lot, and he was playing him in big moments. And even if he wasn't efficient, even if he wasn't scoring, it was very clear that they wanted to get him going, that they saw something in him that maybe us that we couldn't see because we weren't in the practices. Kaysen kept them in that game throughout the entire thing, but especially in the second half. And then really the outlier of all outliers is that Roddy Gale, who had been, you can't call him the worst player on this team, but one of the least efficient and easily the most criticized, a guy that went about a month without making a three-pointer. I think he was 1 for 26 from three at one point, including 0 for 19, right? I mean, just couldn't buy a basket. I mean, for what game was it? I think it might have been Oregon, where he got called for traveling 3 times. I mean, that's just a sign of a guy that's losing confidence and losing belief in himself. He plays the game of his life. No BS, no exaggeration. He goes off for 26 points. He scored 12 points in a row at one point, hit 4 3-pointers, willed Michigan back into that game, and then they were able to finish by, to their credit, knocking down their free throws. Credit to Vlad, credit to Kaysen, credit to Roddy Gale. They all made their free throws down the stretch as Michigan was able to pull away. And then, of course, you had another really clutch Trey Donaldson bucket. I mean, throwing the ball basically over his head when Michigan had a 3-point lead to extend the lead to 5 and kind of put it away for good. It was a gutsy performance. And that's what I tweeted out as we were reaching kind of the home stretch of this game is, look, there's the issues that exist with this team are there. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to notice all the things that are wrong with this team, but there is a toughness here, and there is a heart that they have, and I think a team chemistry, and it's reflected by how they play in these close games. They just don't panic. They were down by double digits against Texas A&M fairly deep into that second half, and you were reaching that danger zone where you're like, man, 2 more empty possessions offensively for Michigan, and we could be looking at a game that's really starting to get away from them. And they cut into it. They didn't panic. They kept grinding. They did their thing. You know, Texas A&M started to miss a lot of outside shots. I thought Michigan's interior defense in the second half was significantly better because there was a period of time at the beginning of the second half where it seemed like they were getting a little bit out-toughed and out-physical, and you thought maybe they were getting tired. They just weren't. They just played their game, and I thought Dusty coached a tremendous game. You have Vlad Golden picking up 4 fouls, kind of early in the second half. After that, really the final 8 to 10 minutes of that game, he was subbing him out every other possession. He was playing him on offense and sitting him on defense to avoid him getting into foul trouble. And then they just played smart basketball down the stretch, and they finished, and they avoided turning the ball over. It was one of my favorite games of Michigan basketball in quite a while, just because of how they did it and how resilient they were. But even beyond that Roddy Gale performance, that to me exemplifies every single thing that I love about college basketball. And even more so, it exemplifies every single thing that I love about college sports and sports in general, or just all sports. And there was a great video, credit to the social team for U of M basketball, posting this on their social media accounts, of Dusty talking to the team after the game and saying to the guys, he goes, "We never lost belief in Roddy. You never lost belief in Roddy." And obviously you have the moment with Danny Wolf saying, "Roddy got his mojo back." And I thought that was so telling of the kind of culture and the kind of team that Dusty May wants here at Michigan. He talked so much in the offseason and throughout the season as well. But when he arrived here, the idea of everyone using the word social, we want you guys to be better socially, to get to know each other better. Jace Howard brought it up when I interviewed him, and the idea of having that camaraderie and that chemistry and playing for each other. And I got to tell you, it's where you have to give Dusty a lot of credit. That's hard to do when you have a whole group of guys who's never played with each other before. And he did what he had to do, right? He had to build through the portal. He was left with nothing. But this has turned into one of the more unique, better coaching jobs, I think, in the entire country in college basketball this year, with not just how he rebuilt the roster, how he rebuilt the culture. And then you have a moment like that where a guy like Roddy Gale, who was a mess. I mean, this guy was a disaster, loses his starting job. He's coming off the bench. He comes into the year as a Buckeye. I mean, transferring from Ohio State, obviously. You read on Twitter a million times, people were saying, is this guy a double agent? Is he working for Ohio State? Roddy Gale might have came in as a Buckeye. He is going to leave as a Wolverine. And regardless of where his career goes from here, he will always have that special moment in this game where he willed Michigan to victory and punched their ticket to the Sweet 16. And it is a unique accomplishment for a program that a year ago at this time was in disarray. Now, I think one of the things about the portal that I love is that you don't have to wait as long. If this was a different era, we'd have to wait till year 3 or 4 for Dusty to get his guys and develop his guys. Now you can go out in the portal and you can get free agents and these placeholder guys that are going to be good for you. I mean, how many big men in the country are better than Vlad Golden, right? But I still think when you look at what they've done, winning the Big Ten tournament and now going to the Sweet 16, I came into this tournament saying that it had already been a successful season, but now this is just becoming a truly unique and I would say wonderful story just from on a human interest level, what this team's been able to do. And this is now, I believe, because let me think, I'll think out loud, 13, 14, 17, 18, 19, 21, 22, 25, the 8th time since 2013 that this program has made it to the second weekend of the tournament. And this is where people get spoiled sometimes. And I don't want to call out the other side, but like the whole idea of, oh, you only celebrate it if it's a Final Four. Those are from people who have taken their Final Fours for granted. Okay. There are, I believe, 364 teams in college basketball in Division I. Okay. Michigan, 8 times since 2013 has been one of the 16 best, sometimes better. Okay. Making this tournament is tough. I mean, you saw it this year. There were the West Virginias and the Indianas of the world, these teams that were pretty good teams that had solid resumes that didn't make this thing. Okay. And once you get in, every team you play can knock you off. And it's gotten tougher the older I've gotten. The gap has narrowed over time. I mean, I know Michigan State pulled away and blew out Bryant, who's a 15 seed, but you can't tell. There was a point during that game where you're watching that and saying, man, Bryant is knocking down some shots. If they could keep this going, maybe they got a chance, as a 15 seed. So everyone you play is tough. And so to come out of the first weekend of this tournament with a first-year head coach coming off of the worst season in the history of Michigan basketball, let's call it for what it was. 2024 Michigan basketball was the bottoming out that we probably never thought we'd see in a post-John Beilein world. To come back and show the resilience that they've showed, this, regardless of how this goes, I think is going to be remembered as a very special group because they bought in and they have really kind of brought this program back from the brink. And going forward, okay, and I will rant more about this as the season continues to go on or by the time we reach the conclusion of this season. I think that people are always quick to abandon the idea that Michigan basketball has the ability to have long-term sustainability. When Beilein left, it was, okay, now we don't have to worry about Michigan basketball anymore. They had their run. And then Juwan had had a few good years and then bottomed out. And it's, well, okay, they're in a transitional period. Look, the biggest reason why Michigan basketball went so long without being competitive, let's call it for what it is, was in large part, almost entirely because of the Fab Five scandal. That set them back really about a decade. And they went 2 decades without making it to the second weekend. And hey, it's your own damn fault, right? You broke the rules. You got popped for it. Like, Michigan isn't the victim in this, even though, I mean, I would argue that what the Fab Five got punished for is something that is not only legal, but accepted today and probably has been well beyond the Fab Five. They just had an example made out of them, but that's beyond the point. In a John Beilein came here, resurrected the program, and now you've had 3 different coaches who have made it to the second weekend here. And I can guarantee you this is not going to be the last time that Dusty May is in the second weekend of this tournament. Now, you look ahead, Michigan plays Auburn, the number 1 overall seed. They won what was a historically stacked SEC this year, an SEC that put 14 teams, that's an all-time record, into the NCAA tournament. Okay, I know they're tall. I know they got shooters. I know they got a little bit of everything. Of course you watch game film and of course you scout. But if I'm Dusty May, and this is where even going back to the Purdue game, the first game of the Big Ten tournament, I think the way that their confidence has grown, they've come to realize that at their best, they can play with anybody. I don't view this as some David and Goliath story. Yes, they will be an underdog, right? As they should be as a 5 seed. But this team won the Big Ten tournament for a reason. They are here in the second weekend for a reason. When this team plays to their capabilities, which is limiting turnovers, making your free throws, and effectively moving the ball and spacing the floor, they can win. Do I think they beat Auburn? Man, it's a one and done scenario. A million things could happen. The meteor could crash into earth and we could all blow up. I know they can. And I think they're going to give themselves a fighter's chance. And I would imagine it's going to be a close game because that's what this team has been all year. And for all the talk about how it's not really sustainable, and throughout the Big Ten season, it wasn't, they've played a million close games and they've kind of won a heavy majority of them. I mean, the games that they've lost have primarily been blowouts. It's been strange. So if they get into another dogfight with Auburn, those last few minutes, I'm going to be confident that they're going to have a chance to pull it out, especially with the potential, Trey Donaldson revenge game going back to his old school. So this is, I don't know how many times I've brought this up on the show, but I had a feeling this would be a surprising year in this state for college basketball, and it definitely has been, both with Michigan and Michigan State. This is a remarkable run for Dusty May's career. This is so much fun. I forgot how much fun this was. Credit to these guys, and I don't want this run to end. This has really been a blast. Good for them. Yeah, obviously that was a long Michigan segment. I had the most to say about Michigan because I think that between the two teams in the state, they were the team that was less likely to make it to the second weekend. But we obviously, and I'm happy to talk about the Michigan State Spartans, who, as a 2 seed in the South region, move on to the Sweet 16 after 2 victories, one against the 15 seed Bryant, the other against the 10 seeded New Mexico, led by Richard Pitino. So Tom Izzo takes out 2 Nepo babies in Phil Martelli Jr. and Richard Pitino. Really good game against New Mexico. We'll start with Bryant. I brought it up a minute ago, but it's just the dynamic of this tournament has changed. Bryant, I thought, really kind of brought their A game. Now, Michigan State did what Michigan State does, and it's what has made them dangerous all year. And what will continue to make them dangerous is just their ability to wear teams down. I remember when Michigan football was making their run in 23, and Joel Klatt referred to them as a boa constrictor, the way that they just kind of wrap themselves around team and they'll just get to you and wear you down and slowly choke you out. It's kind of how I feel about this Michigan State team, where there was points in that first half where it's like Bryant was throwing in some shots, they were kind of helter-skelter on offense, but they were making some outside shots. It just, as the game goes along, there's no team in the country that has the kind of depth that Michigan State has. Now, there might be teams that have more talent at the top, but when you are playing against these mid-majors, it's why I didn't expect this to be a team that got upset early, just because as games go along, you bring out the thoroughbreds and you can play 9, 10 deep. It makes a whole world of difference. Michigan State ended up pulling away and ultimately dominating that game against Bryant. They did not dominate that game against New Mexico. In fact, in the early stage of this game, I brought it up with how Michigan came into the game against UC San Diego and looked quite good. This was the opposite of that. In the early part of this game, it had all the makings of a potential upset. New Mexico early on was throwing in a bunch of shots. They got off to a double-digit lead. They were very active on the defensive end. And you were thinking to ourselves, hey, if they can stay in front here, if they can take a 5 to 10 point lead into the locker room at halftime, this is really going to be a ball game. And it was a ball game, but this is just the problem that you face when you go up against Michigan State, and it's definitely the problem you face when you are a mid-major going up against Michigan State, is that, man, you got to be winning by like 10 at halftime, because this team's ability to play so many guys deep and their ability to rotate so many guys in and out, they're just going to tire you out. And I thought New Mexico played about as well as they could have played in that first half, only led by I think 2 points at halftime. I give Richard Pitino's team a lot of credit, man, because they really went out there and battled. And there was a point in the early part of the second half where you felt like Michigan State was going to pull away and start to dominate. They never dominated this game. I mean, this was that game that every team that makes a deep run in the tournament has, which is this was their grinded out game. Now, Michigan State wasn't out there throwing up bricks. They shot 44% from the floor. But at the same time, you had Jace Richardson, who was 1 for 10. Jeremy Fears didn't make a field goal. Right? I mean, there was a lot of things that didn't go right. And you had this New Mexico team that was scrappy, that was just hanging around, that hit a lot of shots early. It was a really, really well-played NCAA tournament game. And I know a lot of people were frustrated by this weekend. It's the first weekend this tournament was lame. Like, okay, if the qualifications for what is a good first weekend of the NCAA tournament is just a bunch of upsets and buzzer beaters, then yes, this was not a great first weekend. That was a damn good game between these two teams. It's not going to be remembered as a classic, but you had a 10 seed going up against a Goliath, and they gave him a hell of a run. And on a day where Michigan State's best player, or at least the guy who's been their best player over the last month or so, struggled mightily from the floor, you got huge contributions from Jay Nakins. I mean, he was 7 for 11 from the floor. He really kept him in it in the first half, hit some massive threes in the second half to put things away. And then you had Frankie Fiddler off the bench, who was fantastic. I'm not going to call this Michigan State's mulligan, but this was their scare. There was a period relatively deep into the second half of that game where I thought there was a chance that they could end up losing. They just do such a great job of keeping their composure, and they're so well coached that even in those moments where you fear that things are going sideways, we bring it up with Michigan winning close games, but State's won a lot of close games too, and State's finished a lot of games that were tied with 5 minutes to go, where they were down 2 with 10 minutes to go, and then they end up winning by 8. They just do a great job of keeping calm, and you need that in the tournament. You can't have that panic, and I think you saw that from New Mexico at points in the second half, where they just got no rhythm going offensively. I thought Michigan State's defense in the second half of that game was fantastic, and now they find themselves in the Sweet 16. I'm gonna be real with you guys. Michigan State, I don't know, man. Look. Of course, the appealing matchup from a content standpoint would be an Elite Eight matchup between Michigan State and Michigan. We will cross that bridge when we get to it, and as things progress throughout the week, we will discuss it. But there have been instances in the past where Michigan State has gotten tough draws in the tournament, right? And they've ended up losing to teams that were superior to them, either in the Final Four or prior to the Final Four. This particular bracket, it opens up for them. And I hate to be like, oh, it's a disappointment if you don't go to the Final Four, because I brought up earlier with Michigan, like it is an insane achievement just to get to the second weekend of this thing. But your next game is Ole Miss. And look, Chris Beard is an elite coach, and he's a tremendous defensive coach. And obviously, he's gone up against Izzo teams in the past. He was the coach of Texas Tech in 2019 when they beat Michigan State in the Final Four. But this is not a blue blood program you're going up against, and he won't admit it. But if you would have told Michigan State before the season you're going to be playing a 6-seeded Ole Miss team with a chance to go to the Elite Eight, they would have taken it. And then obviously, if you get to the Elite Eight, you're playing either Michigan, a team you've beaten twice, or Auburn, which would be, the number 1 overall seed. The opportunity is there. And I think that Duke is the best team in this tournament. I picked Duke to win the whole thing. And I think they are the closest thing we have to a true Goliath. But as I've mentioned before, there's been years where Michigan State's made deep runs in the tournament and then ran into that brick wall. North Carolina in 2009 is the prime example of that. That MSU team was championship caliber. They make it to the final game, and they play basically a fucking pro team, and they get their doors blown off. There is no 2009 North Carolina in this tournament. Okay? I think the closest thing that we have is probably Duke, and even Duke I think is probably beatable. I'm never going to doubt Izzo, and I'm never going to doubt the idea that Tom Izzo has another deep run left in him. But there's a part of me that wonders how many more he has. And this could be, I'm not going to call it the last hurrah, because, they get back there every year and you keep giving yourself a shot, that you're going to have opportunities. But let me put it this way. They are closer to national championship number 2 under Tom Izzo than I ever expected them to be in a post-Cassius Winston world. And with that comes expectations. So they're gonna have to bring it. And no disrespect to Chris Beard or Ole Miss, but I think you guys get my point. Like this is a true opportunity for them with the way the brackets opened up, the way they've played this season, the fact that they've stayed healthy. I mean, that's a huge thing. And now you run into the possibility of potentially. And Michigan's got a lot of work to do. Michigan and Michigan State have never played each other in the NCAA tournament. And I did a segment on this in the original version of this show 3 years ago when I was at Barstool, where I talked about this and said there was 1 year in my existence where I thought it was a legit possibility. And it was 2014 when both teams lost in the Elite Eight, and had they have continued to win, they would have ended up playing each other in the national championship. Besides that, I don't think they've ever really come close to playing each other in the tournament. So this is the closest they probably ever come. I'm not good with the prediction game. But I did say a week ago, doesn't it kind of feel like that's how this ends? This has been an insane year in this state, a surprising year in the state, a fun year for basketball in this state. And with everything that's gone on, State winning the Big Ten, Michigan winning the Big Ten tournament, these teams winding up in the same region, it's not inevitable unless it happens, but be a hell of a story. I want to talk a little Tigers here. And this will obviously kind of be Tigers week as they open the season on Thursday. And after I do my AJ interview, I will post to all my social platforms my prediction for the Tigers' upcoming season and how I think they'll finish. And so I'll save that to a certain extent. But it looks like the roster is basically made up. No real shocking surprises necessarily. I guess the last kind of piece that was in place is how this rotation was going to shape up. AJ did it the way that I thought he would, the way that I think he should have, which is that Jackson Jobe and Casey Mize fill those final two spots in the rotation. Kenta Maeda will go to the bullpen where he will be a long relief guy, whatever you want to call him, garbage time guy, what have you. I think there can be a place for him in that role. And Cater Montero will start the year in AAA. And I'll probably bring this up to AJ, but when it comes to the pitching, I really think that this organization is in a place that they have never been in before, which is they have major league pitchers that aren't necessarily pitching in the major leagues. And that is depth, and that is a good thing. And just, I want to point this out because I've said when the Tigers are at their worst, one thing I've said is I want to feel like I'm watching a real organization. I want to feel like I'm following a real team. This is what real organizations do. Real organizations have starting pitching staffs that are 12 guys deep where you could call guys up from the minor leagues and they can pitch solid baseball. Cater Montero, I think, is going to be a pretty solid major league pitcher, and he will start this year in AAA. Right. You got guys like Madden. You got Sawyer Gibson-Long, who's coming back. He's only got one option left, but you do still have Matt Manning somewhere in the minor leagues if you want to, kind of use that trump card. That's tremendous. And I have very little concern, even with the inevitable injuries, and I'm sure there will be, with what this pitching staff is going to be capable of. I have the utmost confidence in Chris Fetter, and I really have the utmost confidence in this organization for what they're doing and how they're developing pitching. The injuries offensively scare me a ton. And I don't want to be such a Debbie Downer coming into the year. I mean, it hasn't started yet, but I think, when you don't make that serious of a push in free agency, you had Glaber, who I think is going to have a fine year, but you're without Vierling for a bit. You're going to be without Parker Meadows for a while. I mean, I don't really know what to say, guys. I think this is a very, very concerning injury. The fact that they keep kicking the can down the road, this is very worrisome for me. I think that he is one of the guys that you can't go without for a very long period of time, and now you're going to be without him. There is not a lot of depth here in the outfield. It's the reason why we've seen weird shit like Torque in right field and Javi Baez in center. I mean, I don't know how much AJ is going to, deploy that strategy by the time we get to the regular season, but the fact is this team's success will be made or broken based on how the offense performs. And the defense obviously scares me a bit too, because you're moving guys around the diamond. But the fact is, this team, when they lose games and have lost games over the last few years, it ain't because they're losing 10-9. Okay, it's because they have an offense that's inefficient, that leaves runners on base, that doesn't hit for power. I think that when you look at what this team's record was a year ago, and really the last 2 years, with Parker Meadows in the lineup, it's kind of staggering. You're without that guy at the top of the order now for a while. Now, presumably, hopefully, you have a full year of Kerry Carpenter. That could change things, obviously. And of course, look, there's upside to all these guys. And I've brought it up a million times. There are the what ifs. What if Torque just finally figures it out? Then it's a completely different dynamic. Or Malloy or any one of these guys, right? What if there is another level to Riley Green's game that we haven't seen? At that point, we're talking about a completely different ball club. But, you have to look at the schedule and you have to look at who they're playing. You're starting on the West Coast. You're not only starting on the West Coast, you're starting against the fucking Dodgers. Man, thanks, Rob Manfred. Shit. Not the White Sox? All right. It's going to be tough. And I do have my concerns about how this team's going to start out of the gate, because I need offensive production. And when it comes to my predictions on things, I have a hard time saying this will happen, or this will happen, unless I feel as though it's a sure thing. Like, if they would have signed, and this wasn't going to happen, okay? If they would have signed Juan Soto, right? That's a sure thing. Okay? You're guaranteeing yourself 100 RBIs. But right now you're looking at a whole lot of what ifs, and I don't feel comfortable picking a whole lot of what ifs to win 90 games, to win the division. I think that they can be incredibly competitive all year. I think they're going to pitch their ass off. And I will talk more about it in my preview video that I do later this week. But the fact is, last year was amazing. But what made last year amazing was the fact that if you play that campaign out 100 times, there are 99 versions of it in which that team doesn't make the playoffs. They just got historically ridiculously hot, and it made it very fun. And hopefully it was a sign of things to come. But you can't run it back with that same crew and expect the same results. You won a lot of close games. You pitched incredibly well. You need to see an upward trajectory from a lot of these young guys. If we see that, then we could be talking about a team. I didn't even bring up Colt Keith, but we could be talking about a team that's winning the division. They're going to have their shot, and don't get me wrong, they are more interesting than they've been in a decade, but I think the concerns are legitimate. The fact that you're coming into this year down two very important players on your team. I mean, one of the things that made Vierling so valuable a year ago is he was never injured. The guy played 150-something games, going to start the year on the IL. So AJ's going to have some things he's going to have to figure out here, and I trust that he will. But, it's too bad you can't figure him out against the fucking, I don't know, White Sox and Rockies. You got to do it against, Seattle and the Dodgers. But it is an exciting time. And I don't want to – maybe this is me putting up a shield here because, they could be very good. And, no. Don't disappoint me, baby. Maybe I'm just creating these narratives in my head of they'll struggle because I don't want to have my heart broken. And that's tough with the Tigers. With Michigan or with the Lions, I can come on here and be as objective as possible. And I'm trying to be that way with the Tigers as well. But I think with my heart, not my head sometimes, just because I love this team so much and I want them to be successful so badly. So we can keep speculating, but the games begun on Thursday, and it hasn't quite kicked in yet. Maybe it won't be till the AJ interview where I'm like, oh, dude, hell yeah, let's do it. We're talking about Tiger baseball again. But yeah, it's time. The off season, we've done enough talking. Let's play some fucking baseball. One more thing here, and I feel like I got to mention this just because it is a pretty unique story. The Detroit Pistons are officially, they've punched their ticket to the play-in tournaments. So they're officially in the play-in. I don't think they've officially clinched a playoff spot, but they will. I mean, it would take an epic collapse at this point for them not to comfortably be in the postseason. Had probably their biggest regular season moment, and I mean, real biggest moment. They haven't played in the postseason barely at all, but their biggest moment in a long time last week, nationally televised game against the Heat in Miami. Cade Cunningham with a silencer, a 3-pointer that I think he banked with about 0.6 of a second left. Pistons came away from that game with a victory. It was all over social media. It was really one of the first times in a long time that it felt like the world beyond just Detroit was talking about the Detroit Pistons. And you guys know, I've done a million segments about this stuff. I have a very complicated relationship with the Detroit Pistons. It's the type of thing that's so bizarre that I should probably go to therapy to talk about it. I don't know why it's this weird, complicated, tangled web. It just speaks to my weirdness. But I want to make something very clear, and they have not technically clinched officially a playoff spot, but they will. The play-in tournament, if you want to count that as playoffs, fine. This is, and I say this as somebody who has been as critical as anyone of this organization, and I say this as somebody who's very critical of the NBA as a whole. This is one of the great turnarounds in the history of Detroit sports. Plain and simple. The Detroit Pistons have done the one thing, or actually the many things that I have wanted them to do for a long time. Now, it happened way faster than I ever expected it to, because to Tom Gorris's credit, at the end of last season, they did what had to be done. You couldn't retain anybody from that era. It was a failed experiment, and they went out and they got smarter, and they got people that actually knew what they were doing. They bring in Trajan Langdon, and to Gorris's credit as well, they actually spent a little bit of money. And they got some good players. And then it's weird how when you improve your culture and when you start to employ smarter people, you start to get some good luck, right? Cade becomes a superstar, right? These things just happen when you employ competent people. Culture matters. And the fact that this team a year ago, I mean, they won 14 games. It was one of the worst teams that Detroit sports has ever seen. I mean, they set a record losing streak. It was a chore just to watch a game, a half with that team. And they were totally broken. I mean, you say Cade Cunningham, and I don't blame him for this. It looked like he had just stopped enjoying the sport of basketball for a while. And they have come back this season with a fresh coat of paint. And it hasn't all exclusively been good luck. I mean, Jaden Ivey's been out for a long time. And there's going to be home playoff basketball, most likely, in Detroit this year. You have to consider JB Bickerstaff the coach of the year in the NBA. And I've always been somebody who's like, coaches in the NBA, like how much does it matter? It clearly matters here because either JB Bickerstaff is like the dude or Monty Williams was just the hack of hacks. Because if you watch one quarter of this basketball team, you see a completely different organization than you've watched over the last several years. I know Monty was only here for a year, but I mean, that was 1 year too many. So I'm actually incredibly happy for the Pistons and their fans. And I know I've said a lot of really shitty things about the organization. I've probably poo-pooed the fan base at points. And there have been things that I have had disagreements with them on. I just think in general there was a lack of passion isn't the right word, but just a lack of urgency that existed within the organization for a long time that really pissed me off. It feels like that is back. And while we are not near a point where I'm starting to get 04 flashbacks, just to have a pulse again and just to have a star player would be an accomplishment. The fact that they're going to be a playoff team this year, I brought up Michigan basketball, but I think this one's almost every bit as amazing, if not more amazing. This is just a truly great turnaround. And as I said a few weeks ago, just on a human interest level, I think it's a really remarkable story. You're going to have a lot of people rooting for the Detroit Pistons down the stretch here. Yes, so that'll do it for one of the longer episodes of I'll Say This. Poor Austin, man. I mean, because of Michigan State's stupid late tip time, I'm going to be getting this thing to him at midnight. Look, if this thing isn't up till Tuesday, people, don't freak out about it, okay? We have Chris and company this week. It's AJ Hinch. Huge get. Second time we've had the ability to talk to him. Look, I get asked a lot of questions, whether it's by fans or friends or family members, about what the future of content is going to look like. And I don't set like hard dates and say if it's November 2nd, 2025, and I don't have X amount of followers, I'm leaving. But and I'll be open with you guys. I'm going to be 30, in June. And there are, as much as I love doing this, there are days where, you get down because it feels like life's passing you by. Here's the one thing I will promise you guys. We are going to go totally balls to the wall with content this baseball season. And that doesn't just mean baseball content. We're going to get creative. We're going to keep doing interviews. We're going to do vlogs. We're going to do list videos, movie-related stuff. We are committed to growing this brand. After this season, I don't know what I can promise you guys, but we are going to continue to work as hard as we can possibly work to grow. We just hit 5,000 on TikTok, right? And the goal is 10,000 by the end of the year. I actually think we can get there because we're growing pretty fast. Ultimately, what matters is execution, but I can promise you guys the effort is there. And so just stick with us because the comeback is hopefully going to be better than the setbacks. All right. Castellani 2014 on Twitter. You can find all of our content at castellanicontent.com. Find this podcast in audio form, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, what have you. And let's see, anything else? No. Be ready for the AJ interview, man. That should be a lot of fun. And, we're entering a very good time of year. We've been in a good time of year for sports, and it's going to continue to roll. Go Tigers. Enjoy opening day. I'll talk to you guys real soon. Peace and happiness.